The greatest tragedy of the human mind is its ability to build a world so perfect that reality becomes a disappointment. We spend months, sometimes years, preparing for a journey we haven't even taken a single step toward. We call it preparation, but more often than not, it is a sophisticated form of hiding. We gather the maps, we study the terrain, and we interview the travelers who have returned, all while our own boots remain spotless and dry. The weight of all that unapplied knowledge doesn't make us faster, it makes us stationary. We become paralyzed by the gap between the polished version of the future in our heads and the messy, clumsy reality of being a beginner. We forget that the first 1% of any endeavor is not a measure of distance, but a test of friction. It is the hardest part because it is the only part that requires us to be okay with being terrible. This is the story of Frida, a man who possessed a library of maps but lived in a room with no windows, and the afternoon he discovered that a single grain of dirt was worth more than 1,000 volumes of theory. For as long as Frida could remember, Frida had been a collector of how. Frida's bookshelves were groaning under the weight of manuals on everything from carpentry to coding. Frida's digital bookmarks were a graveyard of ultimate guides and step-by-step frameworks. To anyone looking from the outside, Frida was the most prepared man in the world. Frida knew the exact angle to hold a chisel for a dovetail joint, even though Frida had never touched a piece of oak. Frida understood the nuances of market volatility and the compounding interest of digital assets, yet Frida's bank account remained as static as a photograph. Frida was addicted to the dopamine hit of the aha moment, the feeling of clarity that comes from reading about a solution without ever having to face the problem. The problem for Frida was the first 1%. To Frida, that initial stage felt like a mountain of pure sludge. Whenever Frida thought about actually starting, actually opening a blank document or buying the raw materials, Frida was hit by a wave of physical nausea. The knowledge hoarder in Frida's mind would whisper that Frida wasn't quite ready yet. Frida just needed one more book. Frida needed to watch one more 3-hour masterclass. Frida needed to wait for the perfect window of time where Frida wouldn't be interrupted. Because Frida knew so much in theory, Frida was terrified of how little Frida would know in practice. Frida was a paper architect, building skyscrapers in Frida's mind while Frida's actual life remained a flat, empty lot. The shift happened on a Tuesday, a day as unremarkable as the 1,000 Tuesdays that had come before it. Frida was sitting in a local park, nursing a lukewarm coffee and reading a dense text on the psychology of habit formation. Frida was 300 pages into the book, taking meticulous notes on how to optimize the environmental cues for maximum output. Frida was so deep in the theory of doing that Frida didn't notice the older man sitting on the bench opposite Frida until the man started laughing. The man wasn't laughing at Frida, but at a small child a few yards away. The boy was trying to build a small stone tower near a flower bed. Every time the boy placed a third stone, the whole thing would wobble and collapse. Frida watched, slightly annoyed that the noise was interrupting Frida's reading. Frida looked at the boy and immediately began diagnosing the issue in Frida's head. Frida knew the boy needed a broader base. Frida knew the stones were too round. Frida knew the center of gravity was off. Frida had read an entire chapter on structural integrity once. Frida watched as the boy's tower fell for the 10th time. The boy didn't cry. The boy didn't go buy a book on masonry. The boy simply picked up a different stone, a flat, ugly, jagged one, and shoved it into the dirt. Then the boy took another stone and scraped it against the first one until they fit together. It was messy. It was loud. It was completely unoptimized. But after 5 minutes of trial and error, the boy had a tower 6 stones high. It was the ugliest tower Frida had ever seen, but it was standing. The older man looked over at Frida and noticed Frida's massive textbook. The man pointed at the boy and then at Frida's book. The man said that the boy didn't know the first thing about physics, but the boy knew the only thing that mattered, that the first stone has to be dirty. The man told Frida that most people spend their lives trying to find a clean way to start, but the first 1% is always covered in mud. The man said that compounding doesn't start with a plan, compounding starts with a bruise. That sentence hit Frida like a physical blow. Frida looked down at Frida's pristine notebook and Frida's clean hands. Frida realized that Frida had been trying to skip the bruise stage for years. Frida had been trying to start at the 50% mark, where things are smooth and predictable. But the math of life doesn't work that way. The first 1% is the hardest because it has the highest level of mental friction. It's the stage where you have to trade your identity as an expert learner for the identity of a clumsy beginner. Frida went home that afternoon and did something Frida hadn't done in a decade. Frida didn't open a book. Frida didn't look for a tutorial. Frida took a single piece of wood Frida had bought months ago and Frida simply tried to cut it. Frida messed it up. The cut was crooked and Frida's hand shook, and the result was objectively terrible. But as Frida looked at that ruined piece of wood, Frida felt a surge of energy that no book had ever given Frida. For the first time, Frida wasn't hoarding knowledge. Frida was creating data. Frida began to spend an hour every day being intentionally bad at things. Frida realized that the mental compounding Frida had read about only kicks in after the friction of the start is overcome. Once Frida got past that first 1%, the messy, embarrassing, jagged part, the next 99% actually started to feel easier. The momentum took over. The how started to reveal itself through the doing, rather than the dreaming. Frida was no longer an architect of paper. Frida was a builder of reality. We often think the gap between us and our goals is a lack of information. We tell ourselves we need more clarity, more certainty, and more readiness. But the truth is that you are likely already overeducated and understarted. The first 1% of your journey is designed to be uncomfortable. It is the tax you pay for the growth that follows. If you are waiting for the moment where it feels easy to begin, you are waiting for a ghost. The magic of compounding doesn't reward the person with the best plan. It rewards the person who is willing to be the clumsiest person in the room for just long enough to stop being a beginner. Stop collecting the maps and just put your feet in the dirt. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.